For years, Victoria's song stood as proof that borders no longer mattered in modern pop culture. A Chinese dancer trained in Beijing, transformed inside South Korea's idol system, and exported back to Asia as a flawless K-pop success story. She was marketed as clean, disciplined, and politically invisible. On stage, she was simply an idol. Off stage, she was something far more dangerous. As relations between China and South Korea quietly collapsed, the entertainment industry did not stay neutral. It never does. And Victoria's song found herself drifting from global icon to something no idol is ever prepared to become: a political liability. This is not a story about a scandal, a crime, or a public meltdown. There was no arrest, no leaked tape, no moral collapse. Instead, there was silence. Disappearances from Korean broadcasts, abrupt shifts in media tone, invitations that stopped arriving, a career that did not implode but slowly narrowed until only one country remained safe. In an industry built on image control, Victoria did everything right, and yet she still crossed an invisible line that had nothing to do with music, dance, or fame. What makes her case unsettling is precisely what makes it easy to ignore. No official ban was announced. No statement named her as a problem. But behind the scenes, the rules changed. Being Chinese in K-pop was no longer just a nationality. It became a position, a risk, a test of loyalty interpreted differently on each side of a deepening geopolitical divide. This video is not about choosing sides. It is about exposing how soft power turns human, how idols become symbols without consent, and how neutrality becomes impossible once entertainment collides with state narratives. Victoria's song did not fall from grace. She was quietly reclassified, and once that happens, there is no comeback stage waiting on the other side. Before politics ever entered the frame, Victoria's song was engineered as one of the most successful cross-border experiments in K-pop history. Born and trained in China, she entered SM Entertainment not as a singer, but as a dancer. Disciplined, technically precise, and unusually composed even by idol standards. When she debuted as the leader of FX, her role went far beyond performance. She was positioned as stability, the calm center of a group built to feel experimental but controlled. To Korean audiences, she embodied professionalism without controversy. To Chinese audiences, she represented something even more valuable: proof that the Korean system could elevate a Chinese artist to global relevance. At the time, this dual appeal was not a liability. It was an asset aggressively cultivated by both industries. Victoria was fluent in Korean media etiquette, careful with language, and visibly loyal to the system that trained her. She avoided public political statements entirely, which, in the early 2000s, was not only possible, but expected. This was the golden age of Sino-Korean entertainment cooperation, when idols crossed borders freely. Co-productions flourished, and nationalism remained background noise rather than headline risk. In that environment, Victoria was framed as neutral, reliable, and expandable. She hosted Korean variety shows, led endorsement campaigns, and was quietly prepared for long-term market value beyond music. What made her particularly important was not just popularity, but trust. Trust from her agency, trust from broadcasters, and trust from audiences who saw her as apolitical by design. Yet embedded in that success was a structural flaw no one acknowledged at the time. Her value depended on a fragile assumption that cultural exchange could remain insulated from state conflict. That assumption would not survive the decade. And when it collapsed, the very qualities that once made Victoria indispensable, her nationality, her visibility, her symbolic role as a bridge, would begin to work against her. The rise was real, the design was deliberate, but it was built on political weather that was already starting to change. By the mid-2000s, the environment that once protected idols like Victoria's song began to fracture, not because of anything happening on stage, but because politics finally caught up with pop culture. The turning point was not a single announcement, but a shift in tone that spread quietly through newsrooms, entertainment companies, and broadcast networks. As diplomatic relations between China and South Korea deteriorated, cultural exchange was no longer framed as mutual benefit. It became leverage. Entertainment, long treated as harmless soft power, was suddenly reinterpreted as influence, messaging, and alignment. In this new climate, neutrality stopped being neutral. For Chinese idols working in Korea, silence could be read as avoidance. Visibility could be read as endorsement. Every appearance carried implications that had nothing to do with talent. Victoria, once praised for staying away from politics, now existed inside a system where not choosing a side was itself a choice. Korean media narratives began to harden. Discussions around Chinese idols subtly shifted from performance to loyalty, from professionalism to national identity. Contracts became more fragile, casting decisions more cautious, invitations more conditional. At the same time, pressure from the Chinese side intensified in a different direction. Artists with international platforms were increasingly expected to signal alignment, or, at the very least, not contradict dominant narratives at home. This placed Victoria in a narrowing corridor. Remaining active in Korea risked being interpreted as distancing herself from domestic expectations. Returning fully to China meant accepting a new role, one shaped by visibility and symbolism, rather than artistic freedom. What made her situation uniquely tense was her status. She was not a rookie who could quietly disappear, nor a veteran powerful enough to dictate terms. She was a recognizable face built by a foreign system at a moment when foreign systems were becoming suspect. No official blacklist named her. No policy document mentioned idols. Yet the outcome was unmistakable. The space she once occupied began to shrink. Korean appearances slowed. Long-term projects stalled. Media coverage lost warmth and gained distance. This was not punishment in the traditional sense. It was risk management. When governments clash, industries adjust preemptively, and individuals caught in between are reduced to variables. Victoria had not spoken, protested, or offended. But the political weather had shifted, and she was standing in open ground. From this point forward, every career move would be interpreted through a geopolitical lens she could not control. And once that lens was applied, returning to the innocence of pure entertainment became impossible. The transformation of Victoria Song from admired K-pop leader to a politically sensitive figure did not happen overnight. It unfolded through accumulation. Small decisions, subtle signals, and moments that, in isolation, seemed harmless. But together, they rewrote how she was perceived. As her activities in China increased, Korean media coverage did not turn hostile. It turned cautious. Words like talented and reliable faded, replaced by distance and omission. She was no longer framed as a shared success story. She was reframed as someone who had returned to her proper place. In political terms, that shift mattered. In China, the expectations were different, but no less constraining. Victoria's visibility now carried symbolic weight. Her past in K-pop made her valuable, but also sensitive. Every appearance was read not just as entertainment, but as representation. Remaining silent on political matters was no longer enough. Silence itself became a statement that could be interpreted as insufficient. Public gestures, attendance at major events, and carefully curated messaging began to define the boundaries of what was acceptable. This placed Victoria in a familiar trap for globally known Chinese artists. Visibility without autonomy. She could succeed, but only within a narrowing framework. From the Korean perspective, the recalibration was already complete. Broadcasters did not need directives to understand the risk. Casting a Chinese idol with a strong domestic profile was no longer neutral. It invited scrutiny, backlash, and questions that production teams did not want to answer. Victoria's absence from Korean projects became normalized, explained away as scheduling conflicts or career transitions. But behind those explanations was a quieter truth. Once an idol is perceived as politically aligned, whether intentionally or not, the industry treats them as uninsurable. Too many variables, too little control. What makes this phase of Victoria's story unsettling is the lack of confrontation. No breaking point, no public rupture. Just a steady reclassification. She was no longer an artist moving between markets. She was a figure anchored to one side of a political divide. Her past success in Korea, once her greatest asset, became a reminder of a time that could not be replicated. At this stage, the question was no longer whether she could return to K-pop. It was whether returning was even allowed or simply no longer imaginable. And as her career stabilized in China, a deeper question emerged beneath the surface. Was this a choice she made or a decision made for her long before she realized the door had closed? From the outside, Victoria Song's return to China looked like a safe landing. Lead roles in television dramas, frequent appearances on major variety shows, brand endorsements, and a public image carefully framed as successful and stable. There was no collapse, no visible punishment. In fact, by domestic standards, her career appeared stronger than ever. But safety in this context came with conditions. The Chinese entertainment industry does not operate on ambiguity. Visibility is permission-based, and longevity depends on alignment, discipline, and predictability. For an artist who had spent years shaped by a foreign system, this was not a simple homecoming. It was a recalibration. In China, Victoria was no longer marketed as a global idol. She was repositioned as a domestic figure who had completed her overseas phase and returned at the right moment. Her international background was highlighted selectively, framed as experience rather than influence. The freedom to exist between identities, which once defined her value, quietly disappeared. Every project reinforced a new narrative: reliability, maturity, and consistency. This was not accidental. It was the price of remaining visible in an industry where deviation carries consequences. Within this structure, controversy is avoided not through openness, but through control. Victoria adapted, but adaptation should not be confused with choice. What distinguishes this phase of her career is the absence of experimentation. Risk-taking, reinvention, and cross-border collaboration, once central to her appeal, became rare. The industry rewarded her for staying within approved boundaries. In return, she received stability. Yet stability in this system is not freedom. It is containment. The same political environment that closed doors in Korea ensured that the remaining doors in China opened only one way. There would be no return to ambiguity, no drifting between markets, no space to be undefined. This is where the illusion of safety becomes most revealing. Victoria was protected, but protection came with permanence. She was no longer an unpredictable variable in a foreign industry. She was a managed asset at home. The transformation was complete. Not from success to failure, but from movement to immobility. And in a career once built on crossing borders, immobility carried its own quiet cost. By the time her position in China felt secure, the world she left behind had already moved on. And with that realization came the final question that hangs over her entire story. Was this stability a reward for survival, or the most elegant form of confinement? Victoria Song's trajectory stops being a personal story the moment it starts repeating itself across the industry. By the late 2010s, her experience no longer looked exceptional. It looked predictive. Other Chinese idols trained in Korea began to follow the same narrowing path, not because they failed, but because the system around them changed. What once rewarded flexibility now punished it. In this environment, nationality was no longer a background detail. It became a defining variable that agencies, broadcasters, and governments quietly accounted for. The entertainment industry adjusted without protest because survival required it. Idols were not asked what they wanted. They were evaluated for risk. Victoria's case illustrates how soft power works when it hardens. Cultural exports are celebrated only as long as they align with political comfort. The moment they become ambiguous, individuals absorb the pressure meant for institutions. Governments never need to issue bans when industries self-regulate out of fear. Networks avoid casting. Brands avoid association. Media avoids framing stories in ways that could invite backlash. What emerges is not censorship in its traditional form, but filtration. Careers are redirected, not destroyed. Choices are offered, but only one leads forward. For idols, this creates a paradox with no clean exit. Staying global invites suspicion. Staying domestic demands compliance. Silence becomes risky. Speech becomes irreversible. Victoria navigated this terrain without public defiance, without breakdown, and without visible resistance. That restraint is precisely why her story matters. It reveals how pressure no longer needs force. It relies on incentives, on safety, on the promise of continued relevance in exchange for narrowed possibility. Viewed this way, Victoria's song was never singled out. She was absorbed. Her transformation marked the moment when cross-border idols stopped being bridges and started being liabilities. The industry learned the lesson quickly. Fewer experiments followed. More walls appeared. The era that created her quietly ended, not with an announcement, but with a pattern. And that pattern raises a question that extends far beyond one idol or one conflict. In a world where culture is treated as territory, how long can any global artist remain neutral before neutrality itself becomes unacceptable? Victoria's song did not choose to become a political symbol, but once politics chose her, there was no mechanism to step back, only a direction to move in and a cost for refusing. Victoria's song's story does not end with exile, scandal, or public disgrace. It ends with something far quieter and far more revealing. She survived, she adapted, she remained visible, and in doing so, she exposed a truth the entertainment industry rarely admits out loud. In an era where culture is inseparable from power, success is no longer defined by talent alone. It is defined by where you are allowed to exist. Victoria did not lose her career. She lost the ability to move freely within it. Her transformation from K-pop leader to politically managed figure was never framed as punishment. That is what makes it effective. No statement was issued, no rule was broken. The system simply narrowed until only one path remained open. To the public, it looked like a natural transition. To those watching closely, it looked like a quiet correction. The message was unmistakable. Global visibility comes with obligations, and neutrality is a luxury reserved for those without influence. Victoria's song did not make headlines for defiance. She did not challenge authority. She did what the system rewards, and that, more than any controversy, is what makes her case unsettling. It shows how power no longer needs to silence voices. It only needs to reassign them. When an idol becomes a political problem, the solution is not removal, it is containment. Her story is not unique, but it is instructive. It marks the end of an era when pop culture could float above geopolitics. The bridges that once connected industries have hardened into borders, and those who once crossed them now serve as warnings. Victoria's song was not the last idol to face this reality. She was simply the first to show what it costs when entertainment becomes a frontline, and the performer becomes the terrain.